Now, there's a lot of different thoughts on what we see here, because we are told that in the things that Job did, he did not sin. You get to chapter 42, of course, we've talked about how God blesses Job for his following him. We see that the friends of Job were told to bring their sacrifices for their sin to Job to offer. And so it points us to the fact that Job was righteous through all of this. But when you get to chapter 38 through 41, really the first part of 42, you see Job being told to really start in verse 1 of chapter 38. It says, "Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me." Now, many commentators believe that God is speaking directly to Job in the sense that he is telling Job, you have said some things that were not accurate, that were not correct, and I'm going to straighten you out. I'm going to show you that your knowledge, your wisdom, is not what it should be. That kind of fits. We do have times where Job said things that he didn't fully understand. We talked about in his suffering, he made comments about how God was the one doing these things to him because he didn't know or didn't understand that anybody else could do this to him. But it could be that some believe that this could be the fact that Job is being praised by God in a sense, by God answering in this way, these questions. And really he's focused upon Job's friends. He's speaking to Job because Job is the one who he has spoken to. And he's speaking through Job to get to Job's friends about the things that they have said. And so, whatever the case may be, I think that fits the context better. We're going to see Job respond in different ways and humbling himself. And then we're going to see in chapter 42 that. But the questions is what I want to focus on this morning. The questions that God gives Job. And when you study chapter 38 through 41, to me, what I see is the attributes of God. God is showing us who he is and the things that he knows. And what's really amazing about chapter 38 through 41 is there's things stated here that nobody knew at that time. Nobody could explain the paths of the sea, the things like that. That was not figured out until later in history. And so there's a lot of scientific foreknowledge that God gives here to Job that people didn't understand at that time, that we see and see today in study and research. And so it's amazing the attributes. And so our scripture reading this morning was Romans chapter 1 and verse 20. And Romans 1 and verse 20 tells us that the things of creation can show us the attributes of God. We can see God and who he is and his attributes through creation. And we can. And God's going to use that in what he states here. He's going to talk about the creation of this world, the things that he created, and showing his attributes. Psalm 19 in verse 1. The psalmist here, Psalm 19 in verse 1, looks up and says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament show his handiwork." The psalmist understood that when you look out in this world, you can see that there is a God. Deuteronomy 4 verse 19, many people want to reject those facts. That's really where Paul is going in Romans chapter 1 and verse 20. He's saying you can see the attributes of God in creation, but many people, they see that and they reject it, and they move to worshiping something else, the creation. And so God is going to answer Job with rhetorical questions. What is a rhetorical question? Well, something that doesn't demand an answer, right? It's a question that you should know the answer to. But it's getting you to think. And that's what he's going to do here. And so the first point I want to look at is that God is all-knowing. God is all-knowing. God is all knowledge. Job 38, we'll start in verse 4. Notice what God says to Job here. It says, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding." Where were you? We were not around when God laid the foundations of this world. When you're thinking about the knowledge of God, if you read Job's friends and the things that they have said, all of them would say, as Elihu did, we talked about Elihu a couple weeks ago, Elihu says, "I'm going to take the knowledge from the ancients." Well, what it means is, I'm going to speak to the things that those that were older and wiser than me, the things that they had seen, I'm going to speak to those things. But when God says to Job here, "Where were you when I built the foundations of the earth?" what does that mean? No one was around at that point, right? No one at all. Genesis chapter 1, first day, God makes the earth. It wasn't until day 6 that we have humans. God created us. So, and when he says, "Where were you when I built the foundation of the world?" the knowledge of the ancients was nothing. Their knowledge was not anywhere compared to God's, because God was there. The whole of existence was not created at that time. Job could not have aided God, could not have counseled God, or even understood why God created the world that he did in the way that he did. He wasn't there. God was. And God created this world, as magnificent as it is in this universe, all off his knowledge and wisdom. He didn't need man to tell him anything. He didn't need us to say, "Well, I think you should create," as we're going to talk about the ostrich later, "you should create the ostrich with the brain." God didn't. He did, but not in the sense of having smarts. And so God does not need us in his wisdom, because he is full of wisdom. And so we are not around when God laid the foundations of the world. Notice verse 5. It says, "Who determines its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it?" Remember, these are rhetorical questions. He said, who is the one who measured this earth? Who made its measurements? Who built all of this? Well, of course it's a rhetorical question. God did. God is saying, you weren't there. You're not the one who determined its measurements. God laid the measurements of this earth. God knew the perfect dimensions needed for our earth to sustain itself. Our climate, our ability to live, many other factors depends upon the size of our planet. And God built it perfect. God built it exactly the way it needed. Now you think about, I like watching, the kids will hate this, but I love watching SpaceX stuff. I like watching rockets go up into space. And every time I show them videos of rockets, or want to show them a video, Will always says, "Is it rockets again?" And so I love that stuff. But you think about it, they have all of this, they spend years and years and years researching the best way to make this rocket be able to live in space for a period of time, or to sustain the environment of our outer space. And they fail over and over again, right? And they have problems, they learn from that. God didn't need to do that. God created our environment, our world, perfect the first time. He didn't need a test trial. He didn't need time to do all of this. His wisdom is so superior to ours. He knew exactly what he needed to do the first time, and he spoke it, and it happened. And so Job did not know the size of the earth, nor did his friends, but God does. God built it in the way that it needs to be because of his knowledge. Go over to chapter 39 now. Job 39. We're going to be jumping around into each one of these chapters. But notice chapter 39, look at verse 1 through 4. It says, "Do you know the time when the wild mountain goats bear young? Or can you mark when the deer gives birth? Can you number the months that they fulfill? Or do you know the time when they bear young? They bow down, they bring forth their young, they deliver their offspring. Their young ones are healthy. They grow strong with grain. They depart and do not return to them. See, God knows all the instincts and the habits of animals. Now, you know, they had domestic animals at this time. They had lambs and sheep and cattle and things like that. They could study them, and they knew how long it would be from when they would give birth and the things that they would go through. But the things he's talking about here is the animals that were in the wild that they didn't see very often. They didn't know. And so God is saying, do you know how long it will be before that deer drops its young? Do you know all of the habits and the instincts of these animals that live in the wild that you don't hardly ever see because they live in the forest or they live in the mountains and they're out of your sight? You don't. But who does? God does. Why is that? Well, God created them. God knows every detail about them. God knows their habits. He knows their instincts. You know, man has gained knowledge over many years about many animals, haven't we? You know, you have people that dedicate their lives to a certain species or a certain animal and researching them. They spend years videoing them. You know, you watch the National Geographic Channel, and they're out in the wild, and they have these animals that they're videoing, and they're trying to learn their habits, and they're trying to learn their traits, and all of these things. But it took them years. And do they know everything about them? No. They're still learning, right? What about all these fish that are in the bottom of the ocean that we don't ever see? We're discovering new animals all the time, discovering new species, because there's so much to know that a person can't figure it all out in their lifetime. But God knows everything about those animals. God knows everything about what they do because of his superior knowledge. Jump over to verse 13. Job 39, verse 13. It says, the wings of the ostrich wave proudly, but at her wings and pinions like the kindly storks, for she leaves her eggs on the ground and warms them in the dust. She forgets that a foot may crush them, or that a wild beast may break them. She treats her young harshly, as though they were not hers. Her labor is in vain without concern, because God deprived her of wisdom, and did not endow her with understanding. When she lifts her head on high, she scorns the horse and its rider. And so the ostrich here. See, God created everything in the way that they are today. God created them to be that way for a purpose, for a reason. Now, why is the ostrich dumb? We don't know. I don't know why. I can't explain that. Maybe somebody has a better understanding that has studied ostriches their whole life. But it's interesting that God says here, I purposely gave this ostrich no wisdom. Why? I don't know. If you look at things about ostriches, the males, when they find an egg that is not theirs, they will break it and eat the inside of it. If they know that it's not a part of his and the female's eggs, he will eat it. The female, she'll lay an egg, and she'll walk away and forget that she even laid an egg. That's the idea here of going through that vein or pain of labor, and then forgetting she even has offspring. Those eggs will hatch. The young they'll be born, and she will treat them harshly because she doesn't even know they're hers. Why is that? I don't know. But God designed them that way. Just like any other animal, God designed them for a purpose. God designed them for a reason, and he's the one that knows why. We don't. People spend their whole lives trying to understand them. She can't fly, but she has wings, kind of like a chicken, right? We're talking about our meat chickens that we're going to butcher today, and they don't fly. They just sit there and lay there and do nothing. And Why do they do fly a little bit, the normal chickens can, but why does an ostrich have wings and can't fly? I don't know. But the last verse there says, she lifts her head and she scorns the horse and its rider. Horses can run about 30 miles an hour, and ostrich can run 45. So ostriches are fast. They can't fly, but they can run. And so it's pretty crazy. And so God created everything in the way that he did because of his knowledge. Notice verse 19 through 25, as we're talking about a horse. It says, have you given the horse strength? Have you clothed his neck with thunder? Can you frighten him like a locust? His majestic snorting strikes terror. He paws in the valley and rejoices in his strength. He gallops into the clash of arms. He mocks at fear and is not frightened. He does not turn his back from the sword. The quiver rattles against him, the glittering spear and javelin. He devours the distance with fierceness and rage. Nor does he come to halt because a trumpet has sounded. At the blast of the trumpet he says, aha! He smells the battle from afar and the thunder of captains and shouting. Now this is talking about a war horse, a horse that would go into battle. But it's amazing the strength that these horses have. And not only that, but to be able to not be frightened by the trumpet, by the noises of battle, but to be focused and have no fear. God designed them that way, to be able to do that. And so it's amazing what God can do in his wisdom, his knowledge, and the things that he has done. And so when we summarize the knowledge of God, there's many more that we could look at, but for time, we'll stop there with knowledge. We can summarize the knowledge of God in this way. When we think about how God is all-knowing, it is foolish for us to think that we can make it to heaven on our own. It is foolish for man to think that he can create his own way to heaven. Many try to say that they know better than God, don't they? Think about 1 Corinthians chapter 1. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Notice verse 25. 1 Corinthians 1 and verse 25. It says, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. God, if he had a weakness, would be far stronger than any wise person of this world. God's wisdom is so superior to ours. And so it's foolish for us to think that we can know better than God. The context of Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 is that the preaching of the cross seems foolishness to people. They say, well, why would you think that a man who would let himself be killed, that's God, go upon this tree or this cross to be killed and hung there for 3 days to die? Why would you think that he is a God? Why would you think he is God? They would think that's foolishness. And the preaching of the cross is foolishness to him, but to us, we know that it saves, because the God's wisdom is far superior to ours. And so since God is all-knowing, we should go to him for salvation, right? If we want to be saved, he is all-knowing. Why wouldn't we go to him for salvation? We would go to him to know how to live a good life. If we want to have a good life, then we go to him, his word. If we want to have a good marriage or a good family, God has laid out for us what that would be and what that looks like. And if we follow that, we will have a good marriage. We will have a good family at life. God is the one we go to learn how to be a good citizen, a good employee, or a friend. God has given us that knowledge. We should go to the one who made us and knows us. And just like God knows everything about those animals, their instincts, their habits, the things that we don't even understand, God knows everything about us. And so if we want to know how to have a better life, if we want to know how to get to heaven, we should go to him. And so God is all-knowing. And so he is all-powerful. In Job 38, go back to Job 38. Notice verse 8 through 11. Job 38, verse 8 through 11. It says, or who is shut in the sea with doors, when it burst forth and issued from the womb, when I made the clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band for it, and set bars and doors, when I said, this far you may come, but no farther, and here your proud waves must stop. See, God holds back the sea from flooding the earth. God is saying here, who is the one that keeps the oceans within its borders? Who is the one who does not let the waters cover this whole earth again? Because he's done that at one time, right? At one point, our world had oceans, there was dry land, and then God decided that barrier is going to be stopped. And our world was covered in water again. Then God said, okay, I'm putting that barrier back up during the time of Noah. And the waters receded back to where they were. The sea was covering the whole earth. It's like a blanket. And so God shows his power in controlling the ocean and its waves. Can we control the waves of the ocean? Can we control what the waters do? Ask New Orleans. They put up barriers to try to protect themselves from the ocean and its waves. And during Hurricane Katrina, that showed that man can't control it, but God can, because he's all powerful. Job 38, notice verse 22 and 23. Job 38, verse 22 and 23, it says, have you entered the treasury of snow, or have you seen the treasury of hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war? God stores up hail and snow for his purpose. I love the word that's used here, treasury of snow, because snow is a treasure, right? No, the word treasury means it's a storehouse. The picture given here is God saying, Job, do you know how the snow is created? Do you know how hail is made? Now we know today, we understand how hail is formed and how snow is formed because of temperatures and things like that. But that time they didn't know. And God is saying, Job, do you understand, or his friends, do you understand how hail is made, or how the snow is made? Or that God stores hail for his purpose. Now, during the time of the 10 plagues, God used hail, didn't he? To fight and really to show the power of God to the Egyptians. Joshua chapter 10, we haven't got there yet, but Joshua 10, 11 through 15, God uses hail to destroy the Amorites. And so God here, way before those things happened, God says he uses hail for his purpose. And interesting what we see there. Notice chapter 38, look at verse 24 and 20 through 27. It says, but by what way is light diffused, or the east wind scattered over the earth? Who has divided a channel for the overflowing water, or a path for the thunderbolt, to cause it to rain on a land where there is no one, a wilderness and where there is no man, to satisfy the desolate waste, and to cause spring forth the growth of tender grass? God's sustaining power for the earth. His sustaining power. I see that here. There's a lot of other things noticed here. It talks about how God provides a path for the thunderbolt. That's pretty interesting when you think about how lightning is formed and how lightning works. It isn't a path. It moves in increments of so many feet, and jagged and all that stuff. So it's pretty interesting to talk about there. But we notice God's sustaining power. Verse 41 of 38, he says it again. Who provides food for the raven when the young ones cry to God and wonder about the lack of food? He tells Job, he says, who provides the rain? Who provides the sustaining things needed for the areas of this world where there's no one? Where there's no one there. There is no man to feed cattle. There is no man to help provide things for the animals that are there. God does that because God sustains things for this world. Jesus stated that in Matthew chapter 6 and verse 26. He said, when he talks about the being concerned about the needs of our life, he tells us there that God provides even for the sparrows and the ravens. And so man's power is inferior to God because of his sustaining power. Notice verse 31 and 32. Job 38, 31 and 32. It says, can you bind the cluster of Pleiades or loose the belt of Orion? Can you bring out Mazareth in this season? Or can you guide the great bear with its cubs? What's he talking about? The constellations. See, God keeps the formation of the stars in its place. That's what I see here. It's amazing to think that the constellations that we have today were seen by Job and his friends thousands of years ago. How does God keep those formations there? Because it's his power. And so it's amazing to see. God says, who keeps those formations there? Who keeps those constellations together? God is the only one that can do that. Notice chapter 40. This is my favorite here. Chapter 40, look at verse 15 through 24. He gave the behemoth its power. This is my nickname I got when I was younger, and I love this. So Job 40 and verse 15, it says, look at the behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See now his strength is in his hips, and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like the beams of bronze, his ribs like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Only he who made him can bring near his sword. Surely the mountains yield food for him, and all the beasts of the field play there. He lies under the lotus tree in a cover. The lotus trees cover him with their shade, surround him. Indeed, the rivers may rage, yet he is not disturbed. He is confident. Jordan crushes in his mouth, or gushes in his mouth, though he takes it in his eyes, or one his nose with a snare. The behemoth here, what is it? Well, if you're reading a commentaries that are out there, one of the two big ones a lot of people use is Clark and Barnes. If you look at Clark and Barnes, they'll call this either a large. Well, the reason is Barnes lived from 1770. Clark lived from 1732. Now, if you use a Strong's Concordance, he lived from 1892 to 1899. The word dynasty wasn't even created, or not even was used until 1890. The first dinosaur bone was found in 1890. They didn't know dinosaur when those comments were written, when Strong's was written. This is a dinosaur. If you notice in verse 15, it says, now look at the behemoth which I made along with. I don't want to say this is a dinosaur because the fact that would mean that man and dinosaurs lived at the same time. But this behemoth is. It is massive. About its trunk is like a cedar tree. It's a massive animal. And then notice here it says that only one that is able to take the animal, notice verse 19, is the first in the ways of God. Only lead him can bring him near his sword. The only one that could take him down was God because of his strength. A dinosaur, this was a huge, huge animal. The only one that has that power. He gave that behemoth its power, and he is the only one able to take that power. Now, 41, army of 135,000. Holly said it was a 400 to 1, or something over 400, 450 to 1 ratio. Yet God was on their side. That's why they were going to win. With God on our side, we win. Romans chapter 8 and verse 31. Romans 8 and verse 31. What shall we say then to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? See, God is on our side. And if we are with God, we will stand. And so we should strive to always be on God's side because he is all powerful. Last point, I know we're out of time. Last point, this is a short one. God is everywhere. You go back to Job 38 real quickly. Job 38. Notice verse 16 and 17. It says, have you entered the springs of the sea, or have you walked in the search of the depth? Have the gates of death been revealed to you, or have you seen the doors of the shadow of death? God can enter the depths of the sea. We have spent millions and millions of dollars. People have lost their lives trying to get to the depths of the sea, to be able to see what is there. And God has been there. God is there. Because God is everywhere. God is omnipresent, is the word that we could use there. And God is where light begins. Go with me to chapter 38, verse 19 through 21. It says, where is the way to the dwellings of light, and darkness, where is its place? That you may take to its territory, that you may know the paths to its home. Do you know it because you were born there, or because the number of your days is great? He's saying, do you know where light comes from? Have you been to those places? Man can't get close to the sun physically. We may send an instrument in to try to get close to the sun, but man can't. We can't reach the stars, but God is there. God is where the light begins, because God is everywhere. And so we can summarize the presence of God in this way. One last verse, Psalm 139. Psalm 139. Notice verse 7 through 10. The psalmist here, which I believe is David, says this, verse 7 through 10. Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell below, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost part of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall fall on me, even the night shall be light unto me. Indeed, the darkness shall not hide from you, but the night shines as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to you. We cannot hide from God. God is everywhere. Jonah tried that and failed. And so we can't hide from him. And that's good in a way, because if it's a good thing that God sees the things that we do and that we are his servants. But for those that are doing evil, or those that are trying to sin in secret, God knows, because he is there also. Hebrews 4 and verse 12 through 13 tells us that God knows and searches the hearts of men. But we can also be comforted in knowing that wherever we go, God is there with us. We're never alone. God is there to be that help when we need him. And that brings us comfort. And so when we think about the attributes of God, we should remember these things, that God is all-knowing. And we should always go to him for the things that we need physically and spiritually. God is all-powerful. And when we are on his side, no one can touch us spiritually. God is there. He is so powerful, nobody can overtake him. No one can stop him. And so therefore, when we are in his care, no one can touch us spiritually. God is everywhere, and knows the good and the bad in our life. But God is also everywhere, and so that we will never be alone. But all of these things that we have talked about are spiritual blessings. Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 3, it says, all spiritual blessings are in Christ. If we're not in Christ, we do not have that comfort. We do not have that protection. We don't have that knowledge, that wisdom that God provides. And so if you're not a Christian this morning, you can make that change by putting him first in your life, by first following that plan of salvation that he has laid out for us. See, a person may think that they have comfort. They may think that they have God's protection. But if they're not in Christ, by following his plan of salvation, by doing the things that God has said to do, they're deceiving themselves, because they don't have those blessings, because all spiritual blessings are only in Christ. And so if you're not a Christian this morning, I encourage you to not wait, but do it now as we stand, as we sing.